Hi, it's Phil Turner from Timeform. We're looking forward to the forthcoming Cheltenham Festival. By looking back, we're looking at some Cheltenham memories, and they thought we'll just drag out the oldest fogey in the office to sort of talk about some old races. So here I am, and we're going to look at sort of 5 of my favourite Gold Cups. And we're going to start with what I think is the most exciting race I've ever seen at Cheltenham, and that's the 1986 Cheltenham Gold Cup, which was Dawn Run's historic win. And as I say to people nowadays, it's quite hard to sort of convey what made it so special. Perhaps if you watch it on YouTube now without knowing the sort of backdrop and the context, you think, yes, it's an exciting race, but why is it sort of ranked so highly as being so exciting? I think it's a lot of it's to do with the mare herself, Dawn Run. It was in an era when the Irish weren't having loads of winners at Cheltenham, and she was absolutely their flag bearer. She'd won the champion hurdle in 1984. And she was always very aggressively campaigned. That season she ran twice in 24 hours. In '83 she won twice in 24 hours at Aintree, nearly beat the then champion hurdler. And after she won the '84 champion, she went on to win several big races in France. So she had a huge following. Her novice chase season became curtailed to just one successful run, and then she was being aimed at the Gold Cup the following year in '85-'86. Which meant she was going there effectively as a novice. She wasn't technically a novice, but she was going there over only a handful of starts, and it all went wrong on her prep run, which is in the race at Cheltenham, which is now called the Cotswold Chase on Trials Day. And she was miles clear, and she unseated Tony Mullins at the final ditch. And then all the hoo-ha started, because Tony Mullins was the trainer's son. He'd been jocked off when she ran there at the '83 Festival in the novice hurdle. He was jocked off again for John Joe O'Neill in the '84 champion hurdle. And although he'd enjoyed plenty of big wins on her, he was jocked off again in the build-up to the '86 Gold Cup. John Joe was a veteran by this stage. He got the call again, a very popular figure, former dual champion jockey. But because of all this and the fact the sort of lack of experience, there she was, helping force the pace in the Gold Cup, and literally every fence you were holding your breath, wondering how she was going to get on. She dropped her hind leg in the water second time round, and she hit the fence at the top of the hill, but by and large she was pretty good. But they got a real clip, and when they came into the early in the straight, John Joe asked for an absolutely massive leap at the second last. Again, we were holding our breath there. She got over it okay, but coming to the last, it looked like third was all she was going to get, because Wayward Lad and Forgive and Forget seemed to have her measure. He switched her on the run in, she dug deep, and she got up for an absolute grandstand finish to win, hats in the air. And the sort of unprecedented scenes, they were not commonplace then. We sort of, the modern day celebrations we get for horses coming in, I think really did start. It kind of half started in '84 when she won the champion hurdle. It definitely started when she won the Gold Cup in '86. A remarkable mare. Sadly, she wasn't around for much longer. She died in France a few months later, but that was the most exciting Gold Cup in my memory, and definitely number 1 in my list. Number 2 on my list would be a very personal one, because it was my first visit to the Cheltenham Festival. It was the 1981 Cheltenham Gold Cup. And I was bunked off school by my late mother. She faked a dental appointment, and I was taken there by my gran, and we was all there to see Night Nurse. Night Nurse was my favourite horse, and he'd come back from injury. He was a dual champion hurdler early in his career, and he was trying to do what Dawn Run did later on. He was going for the champion hurdle Gold Cup double. He didn't quite do it, but boy did he put up a good effort. He took over the running with about a circuit to go and wound things up, and he put in some absolutely spectacular leaps on that second circuit, got them all going. But again, rather like Dawn Run, it looked like third was all he could hope for early in the straight, because Little Owl and the favourite Silver Buck had come to do him. But typical Night Nurse, he dug deep, rallied bravely, and was closing all the way to the line, and he was just beaten by his stable companion Little Owl. So he was deprived of the champion hurdle Gold Cup double by his stable companion. All I remember about that day is that it seemed like the whole place was all cheering him on. We see how these horses get followings. It happens far more in national hunts, and at that particular time it was very much Night Nurse who had the sort of following. In more recent years, perhaps Q Card has had it. Yeah, he was. The jockey said afterwards he got a bigger cheer for walking in, finishing second, than the winner actually did. So, yeah, good old Night Nurse. We'll move on to far more recent times, and a horse who we've just been talking about, Q Card, a horse who probably doesn't get quite the sort of public recognition he deserves, and that's Don Cossack, who who was a very, very good Gold Cup winner in 2016. He was obviously a very talented horse in bumpers, and he kind of tread water a bit in his novice hurdle and novice chase campaigns. But once he sort of finally matured into that giant frame, boy did his form take off. And for the last 2 seasons he was racing, he was undoubtedly the best chaser in training, posting some huge figures against the clock. And of course his sort of first sort of big moment in a staying race on British soil came in the King George of that season, when he was coming through to challenge Vitor and fell at the second last. Q-Card was just behind him at that stage, and he managed to get up and just pip Vitor in what was a vintage renewal of the King George. Now, we took some flack at the time because we rated Don Cossack the narrow winner, saying if he'd have stood up, he'd have won. And perversely, the roles were reversed at Cheltenham because Q-Card was bang there when he fell at the third last at Cheltenham. And some of the same people who slagged us off for rating Don Cossack the winner now thought Q-Card should be rated the winner. I'm fairly sure Don Cossack would have won. The sort of the huge feature of his performances in the final 2 years of his career was he was so strong at the death in his races, and having been left sort of upside with Jack Adam once Q-Card had went, he put the race to bed very, very quickly in the straight, running to a very, very high figure. And as I say, he never ran again, sadly. He picked up an injury, and connections were quite keen to sort of rough him off after that. But because he only had the one Gold Cup winner in his CV, I think he gets forgotten a bit when compared to the likes of sort of Best Mate or Corto Star. He was a very good horse, and from a personal and professional reckoning, we really like Don Cossack a lot. Moving on to another sort of vintage Gold Cup, one of the most talked about ones would be Denman in 2008. It was all about Corto Star and Denman, and it was very much sort of echoes of Arkle Millhouse meeting in '64. The roles were reversed to some extent because in that, Millhouse was the reigning champion, Corto Star's the reigning champion. But if you look this time around, if you looked at their running styles, Corto Star was very much Arkle and Denman was very much Millhouse. Denman being the sort of relentless galloper, very much a stayer, huge horse, whereas Corto Star was the classier, sort of could do it over more of a variety of trips, and that sort of panned out over their career. But unlike Arkle and Millhouse, Denman got the better on the Gold Cup day, and he also got the better in the head-to-head. He had a 3-1 record against Corto Star, who was undoubtedly the better horse looking at as the whole. But it was a cracking race, breathtaking race. And it just shows how sort of the dynamic of watching racing had changed from the days of Dawn Run. When Dawn Run, it was firmly the binocular age, and you were sort of relying on the commentator or people with sort of zooming in to see what was going on out in the country. Nowadays, by 2008, most of the people in the stands are watching the big screens, excellent pictures, and boy, could they pick up on any kind of sort of change in the body language from Ruby Walsh. As soon as you knew he was sort of in trouble 5-6 hours, far earlier than you'd have thought from Corto Star. The gasps from the stands was sort of audible, and it was really sort of talking about sort of a group of people being just so engaged in a race, and you really do get that in some of the big races at Cheltenham, and this one in particular. Denman sort of put a massive injection of pace between 4 out and 3 out, looked to have sort of had it all sewn up then. He paid for that a little bit in the straight and got a bit tired, and Corto Star, to his credit, did rally and looked just for a split second as he might reel him in at the last, but Denman had enough in hand to hold on for a famous win. And it's just funny, at that stage, you just thought the world was absolutely his feet. He was unbeaten over fences. No one leaving the course that day would have thought Denman would have 10 more runs and he'd have one more win. But that's just the way things panned out. He had heart issues. And although he had plenty of good runs in defeat, including 3 times finishing second in the Gold Cup, as I say, whether he was ever fully the same horse again as he was on that day, it must be open to debate, but a memorable race. And then just finally, a race which wouldn't be sort of a vintage one in terms of form, and that's part of the reason to flag it up would be the 1992 Gold Cup won by Cool Ground. And I think unlike a lot of championship races, the Gold Cup often isn't won by the best horse. If you compare it with something like the King George, even the Champion Hurdle, the Champion Chase, 9 times out of 10 the best horse does win. But the Gold Cup, whether it's to do with the fact it's such a test of stamina, and things can happen, and stamina can often kick into play. There's been a lot of big price winners in this race, and the 1992 one certainly could fall into that category because it was dominated by a horse called Carville's Hill, who was the great hope of the Irish in the late 80s. He was switched yards to Martin Pike for the 91-92 season, and his form just took off again, and he posted some huge Timeform figures, particular massive weight-carrying performance in the Welsh National. And he did look by far the best on form in this race, and had scared off a lot of the opposition. There were only 8 runners. In truth, the only real danger looked to be the fellow, the French horse, who'd been runner-up the year before, and he'd won the King George in the interim. So he looked his only real serious danger. But it became a real sort of controversial race because one of the other sort of hopefuls, a horse called Toby Tabata, had been runner-up in 1990. The same connections put a pacemaker in called Golden Freeze. And was he a spoiler? Wasn't he a spoiler? But he was certainly ridden a bit like a spoiler because every time he got in front of Carville's Hill, he was reined back. And whatever the merits of those tactics, he definitely put Carville's Hill off. He made several mistakes, and he was a spent force early in the straight, and sadly never raced again. Picked up an injury that day. So you thought, well, it's all there for the fellow then, and even the fellow couldn't get the job done. He was in front probably a bit sooner than ideal. And Cool Ground, who was a good horse on his day, but he wasn't sort of a vintage stare. He just hit a rich vein of form that spring. He'd won at Haydock just a couple of weeks earlier, and he stayed on best to win a thrilling finish, a thrilling 3-way finish. But I'm fairly sure even his biggest fan would never claim that he was the best horse in that race. So I say it is typical. Sometimes you do get strange results in the Gold Cup, and that was certainly one of them.